Let me just start by saying good morning to all of you joining us here at Google in Washington, and to folks out in the cloud who'll be watching this on YouTube. And thank you for joining us. I'm Alan Davidson. I am the head of US Public Policy for Google here in Washington. Started our office here about 3.5 years ago. And we're delighted to have you all here today for our talk and discussion about cloud computing. I should say that, to the extent that a company that's only 10 years old, it's basically a fourth grader, can have traditions. One of the traditions at Google is to have these kinds of discussions, to invite people who are some of the leading thinkers on issues that affect our environment and the industry and the milieu that we work in, and have them talk about looking ahead, looking around the corner at some of the issues that we're going to be facing. And so in that spirit, when we started our office here in Washington, one of the things that we really wanted to do was to create a place where we could have those kinds of conversations about the future of technology and the issues that face not just the internet, but technology in general here in Washington. So this DC Talk series for us is something that's very important. It's a big part of the reason that we're here. And we've been very lucky to have, we've had a couple of talks so far. Larry Lessig and Jonathan Zittrain were here earlier this spring. We had a talk about the internet economy and the state of the internet economy. Our next, I'll just put in a commercial plug for our next few talks. We've got on October 3rd, Craig Newmark of, the list will be here, and then we will on October 15th actually have a talk and a panel discussion by Jonathan Palfrey from Harvard Law School about his new book, Digital Natives. So we invite you all to come and make sure you're on our mailing list, and we're delighted to have you here joining us. Today, our focus is on the release of a new report from the Pew Internet and American Life Project on cloud computing. And according to the research of the report, and I don't want to steal all of John's thunder, but 69% of online Americans are now in the cloud. They're using web services, their webmail services, they're storing data, they're working off of web-based software like word processing or photo storage programs. It is not clear to us that people really, our users necessarily even understand how cloud computing works, where their data is even being stored. And also, importantly, it is not clear that people in Washington, particularly policymakers, fully understand the implications of this really fundamental change in computing architecture and the way that people are using the internet. So we're delighted today to have a panel of experts here to shed some light on this. And I'm going to introduce John first, and then we'll also then have a series of responses from our group who are here to join us today. And John will present, let me start by introducing John Horrigan. John is the Associate Director of Research at the Pew Internet and American Life Project. He studies the online behavior of broadband internet users, mobile internet users, and consumers of other leading edge information technology. He also leads Pew's research on the internet's impact on people's social networks, news gathering habits, and consumer decisions. And I'll just add that Pew and the Pew Internet and American Life Project particularly really emerged as a kind of guiding light for all of us on the internet and how people really understanding how consumers and citizens are using the internet, how it's changing our lives. And so we're delighted to have him here today to present his research. So thanks. And I'll turn the remote over to you.
Thank you very much, Alan. And I'd like to, first of all, thank everybody at Google who made this forum a way for us to release our research today. We really do appreciate it. What I want to do is just go through some of the data that we found in asking people about how they use the cloud and their attitudes about using the cloud. So that's kind of an overview of what I'm going to talk about. And really a big message when you get to thinking about people's attitudes about storing so much personal data on the cloud is it's sort of users to vendors. Let's keep the data between us. Before I get going on the data, what I want to talk about a little bit is the spirit of this research. We didn't really enter into it thinking, let's ask users a comprehensive set of cloud activities and get a definitive answer as to who's using the cloud, for what purposes, and what their attitudes are about it. Rather, we wanted to sort of wade into the waters, if I can mix the metaphor, and ask people a confined set of cloud activities, and then ask them a couple questions about what they like about the cloud and what might be some of their worries about possible, I underscore possible, data use policies by companies who may be involved in storing data in the cloud. So let's turn to the numbers. As Alan said, we did find that 69% of online users have done one of any of these cloud activities. And you can see that webmail is sort of the starter drug for using the cloud. And we see that being a very prevalent activity among internet users. 34% of people also store personal photos on the internet. We see, and this, the level of this surprised me a little bit, 29% of users saying that they've used some sort of cloud application, whether that's Google Documents or Adobe Photoshop Express. 7% are storing videos online, 5% pay to store computer files online, and 5% back up their hard drive to an online site. I'm one of those people who pay for that service but never use it because I haven't figured out how. So there's even people who study the cloud don't quite clue into it sometimes. So those are the 6 activities we asked that characterize, for the purposes of this report, the set of people, of online users using cloud applications or services. So what do people like about the cloud? 51% of internet users who have done one of these cloud activities really like it because it's easy and convenient. They say that's a major reason why they do that. 41% say they like the ability to access their data from whatever computer they may be using, or really these days whatever device they may be using. Other data points, 39% like cite the ease of sharing information, and that's an important thing to think about since the participatory internet is such a big deal these days. And 34% are into it basically because of risk aversion. 34% say they value it because they won't lose data if their computer fails. Now let's turn to what worries users. We did ask these attitudinal questions that sort of walked people through some scenarios about possible secondary uses of their data. And 90% of cloud users said that they would be very concerned if the company that was storing their data sold it to another party. So high levels of concern there. 80% said they would be very concerned if their photos or other data were used in marketing campaigns by companies. 68% expressed concerns basically about targeted advertising. You know, if vendors were to analyze their data and serve up ads to them based on that data. Another set of worries had to do with people saying they'd be concerned if they deleted data, yet the data stayed somewhere on a server, even though they thought it had gone away forever. And then finally, 49% said that they would be very concerned if a company gave law enforcement agencies their files. Maybe before we turn to Dan, if I could just make a few comments about really how to think about this data in the proper context. The data itself really tells us a little bit about the level of demand and use for these services, but I think it's important to understand the nature of the demand for these services. And I think the first thing to keep in mind is that the internet really anchors itself in people's lives as a social and participatory tool. We see this in all manner of research that we do at the Pew Internet Project, but when you look at even the cloud applications, the leading uses are social, webmail, storing personal photos, and you could see that a lot of people said that they valued the cloud for the ease of sharing information with others. So that social nature of the internet really informs how they use cloud applications. Secondly, people are very obviously making trade-offs in privacy when they do these behaviors. You see fairly high levels of use of the cloud and high levels of concern about various dimensions, possible secondary uses of the data. And that means that people are weighing the pluses and minuses, often in very situational and subtle ways. One article in doing this research that I saw about cloud computing came from the Baltimore Sun. I think it was in February of this year, and it talked about a woman who stored photos online in a public place. She wasn't too concerned when she found out that one of her photos was being used by a church for some reason. She started to get a little concerned when she discovered that some company was using one of her photos in its marketing campaigns. So the trade-offs that people engage in, what worries them, can be sometimes very subtle. And finally, I think one reason for doing this research, one reason for having this forum is to try to improve people's public understanding of the cloud. That's one thing we say very explicitly in the report, and as I think you've seen in the data, because of these high levels of use of the cloud against some high levels of concern about the cloud, people really use it more than they understand it, and I think it's worthwhile in having some data as an anchor to continue and open up public discussion about the consequences of people having more and more of their data stored in the cloud. So with that, I will pass this, I suppose, to
yes,
Dan.
well, let me jump in for a second. I'll introduce our respondents, and then we will pass the remote control, the source of all control. We're very lucky to have with us three of the keener observers and contributors to the debate on internet policy for the last decade. I'll start by introducing Dan Burton, who's Senior Vice President for Global Public Policy at Salesforce.com, and has been involved in the development of internet policy for the last 20 years. Prior to Salesforce, he was vice president. He had similar roles at Intrust and also at Novell. And I'd say that personally, Dan has been a great resource for me because he's the other guy in Washington who's had to staff our CEO, Eric Schmidt, before. So it's great to have Dan here. Mike Nelson is now a visiting professor at the Communications, Culture, and Technology program at Georgetown University. Prior to that, he was for many years the director of Internet Technology and Strategy at IBM. He was also the director of Technology Policy at the FCC, a special assistant to the president for Information Technology at the White House, Office of Science and Technology Policy, and his current research examines the future of the Internet, cyber policy, and technology policy. And Mike has also been one of the leaders from before the time that anybody was really talking about the Internet. Mike's been talking about the Internet in Washington. And finally, Ari Schwartz is the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at the Center for Democracy and Technology. He's testified numerous times before Congress and the executive branch agencies on privacy and access to government information. Ari and I worked together for many years at the Center for Democracy and Technology, and I think of nobody better to have here to give us an assessment in many ways of the user impact, and particularly on the privacy and security issues that users care so much about. So we'll just take it from there. Dan.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Alan. For those of you who don't know Salesforce.com, we provide business applications that allow organizations to manage their customer relationships and really their businesses on the internet. And for the past several years, we have been the second fastest growing technology company behind Google. So we're happy to be here today. So my comments as a vendor in cloud computing are going to be a little different than John's because we are in the business-to-business realm. We don't deal with a lot of the consumer applications that Google does and that John talks about in his survey. And I would like to start with a hypothesis that I think I've spoken to Alan about, which is I think cloud computing is the hot topic over the next year in Washington, and Google is trend-setting here with this conference. And I think there are going to be numerous conferences, panels, colloquiums over the next year. So I look forward to seeing all of you several times over the next 12 to 18 months. And
I had to pay him $20 to say that, by the way.
Hopefully we can all learn something together. So let me just start off. I only have a couple of slides. Evolution of the cloud, really what is cloud computing? And I think just as we move from the mainframe into client server, now we are moving into cloud platforms. And there's sure to be lots of discussion and debate about what is cloud computing, are you a cloud computing company or not, which I actually am not sure is that worthwhile a conversation to have. But I think the key elements are what cloud computing entails is computing in remote data centers which are platforms that host multiple organizations and millions of users on one platform and that are accessed over the internet. So I think those simple tenets, it's a remote data center, there are millions of people on one platform using the applications, writing applications on that data center, you get to it over the internet. And I think those are really the three core criteria. Lots of analysts have written about what is cloud computing, who are the companies, and I think there's sort of an easy way to segment it, obviously into the business and consumer world. But at one level, there are applications. This is something that Salesforce has done in the past. So if you want a customer relationship management application, you put your data in Salesforce, you get on the internet, all of that data is processed in the application that's served up to you. And all of the users run on one platform, something called multi-tenant architecture. And what's interesting about that is I think it's almost akin to having an office in an office building instead of a house. So if you have an office building with multiple tenants, everyone is benefiting from the same infrastructure, air conditioning, heating, cooling, telephone, elevator, parking, whatever external facilities they have. But yet when you have your suite, your office, you can decorate that however you want. You can change the wall color, you can have colonial furnishings, you can have contemporary furnishings, you can have whatever Google calls their furnishings here. So you can really have your...
IKEA.
There you go.
Googly.
So you can really customize those applications to suit your business needs, but take advantage of a scale and an internet platform. So that's one level, and Salesforce provides applications like that, as does Facebook and several others. Then if you go down to another level, and this is something that we just started, called Force.com. Google has something called web applications. They're web engine apps. And this really takes it to another level. So suddenly I'm in a high rise, I have my office suite, and not only can I decorate it any way I want to, I can remodel it. If I want to knock out a wall, if I want to move the kitchen somewhere else, if I want to have round windows instead of square windows, if I want to have a 2-floor suite and with a double high ceiling, I can do all that. And basically what that is, it is a platform for developers. So those developers are partners, they are SIs, they are often case customers, and suddenly the tools exist to go into these internet platforms and create any application that you want to. And in creating that application, again, you are benefiting from all the infrastructure, the scalability, the cost advantages, the immediacy with which you can get those applications up and running, but you customize them to a profound degree to your needs. So that's sort of another piece, a platform as a service is what we call it. And then there's a third piece, and this is actually an area we don't play in. I think Google does, Amazon certainly does, and that's really utility computing. So that's if you just need raw computing power, if you need storage, if you need CPUs, you can go to the internet, and there are massive data centers that can do that. And the example everyone uses is Amazon.com. When the New York Times wanted to digitize all of its articles, I think from 1859 to 1982 or something, they went to Amazon and they did all that in a matter of days. They paid for it with a credit card. And the payment schedule on that is micropayments. So it's sort of like electricity. You're only paying for the usage that you have. Whereas the other two, the applications and the platform, are generally on a monthly subscription basis. So again, you're paying just for your usage on a monthly basis, but you're saving all of the upfront costs of having to buy hardware, buy software, set up all of the infrastructure, have all the IT people to manage that. So that's sort of in a nutshell what cloud computing is. And so why is it so powerful? Gartner says it's going to have 25% of the market in 2.5 years. You can get your applications up and running very, very quickly, in weeks as opposed to months or years. You get all of your security centralized and controlled in a very secure environment. And we can come back to security if you want. All of a sudden, you reduce risk. Instead of buying big software packages, building out big implementations, you can set up a pilot, you do 20 users, however many you want, you get it up and running quickly, so the risk is much lower. You reduce your costs, you improve your customization, and you get rid of infrastructure management. So those are some of the quick advantages. And I think the big change right now, because the applications have been in the cloud, software as a service has been around for several years, is the innovation. So suddenly you can be an entrepreneur in Varanasi, India, with no capital, no infrastructure, no computing centers, but with some great ideas and some great technical skills. You can go onto one of these platforms, you can create an application, and you can have one of these people host it, and then you can sell it globally. So it is an innovation program which is going to have tremendous ripple really throughout the global economy. And then I won't really talk about security. Maybe we'll come back about that, but we can get into that later as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Mike?
Well, thank you. I want to thank Google for hosting this event, and very glad to see so many people here, because I like Dan, I think that cloud computing is going to transform the way we do computing, and not in 10 years, but in about 4 or 5. And we have to be thinking right now about how organizations and individuals adopt to this technology, how policymakers adapt outdated policies to meet this new reality. As Alan said, for the last 20 years I've been here in Washington, and I've been serving as a translator between the technical community and the policy community, trying to help them understand each other, trying to help policymakers understand some of the new opportunities so that they can future-proof their policies. We've got some real challenges here. The punchline of my talk is that we've got some huge challenges, both in the area of technology and telecom policy, and in other areas where assumptions are made about how computing is done back in 1992 or 2001 when the law was written, and those assumptions are no longer right. So let me talk a little bit about how I see cloud computing and how policymakers might want to think about it going forward. I have some very simple CEO level slides here. The most important slide is my email address. If you Google Mike Nelson, you'll find all sorts of interesting things. You probably won't find me. But mnelson@pobox.com if you want a copy of these slides or if you want to argue with me. As was said earlier, this really is transformative. We're entering a third stage of computing. The first 20 years of internet was all about point-to-point communications, email. The web was created, and suddenly the net became a broadcast medium. Now, with cloud computing, we have a chance to connect millions of people together with millions of different data resources and really have a new way of getting access to the tools we need. I can't emphasize how important this is. Maybe the best way to emphasize that, the importance, is to make analogies. This is as important as the web was 15 years ago. And we're about where we are today. We are with the cloud about where we were in 1993 with the web. The basic technology is there. The standards are being worked out. We have a vague idea of how important it is. We don't really have many clues as to how it will be used. But those of us who are following this closely know that it is going to change almost everything we do with computing, and it's going to have a lot of policy implications. There's also a lot of confusion about just what is the cloud. And if you read the definitions, you see that there are a number of different ways to think about it and define it. Lots of different brand names. We have software as a service. We have the grid, which is really the precursor of the cloud in some ways. Lots of different names, lots of different ideas about how to define it, but the common thread is, as Dan said, lots of different machines in lots of different places running common software that allows them to work together. This is a chart that I've used for about the last 4 years to explain grid computing. On the vertical scale is the number of machines in the cloud, and on the horizontal scale is the power of each of those nodes. 1 is a PC or even a cell phone. 10 and 100 is a large server or even a supercomputer. The first real application, the first proof of principle of this concept was really Napster. Hundreds of thousands of machines all networked together, providing services to millions of people. It was only one purpose. It only provided you with files. It was illegal, lots of problems with it, but it showed how powerful the service was. And very quickly, people found other ways to do that kind of thing. So that's what we have up in the top left corner. Millions of small machines loosely coupled together. In the bottom right-hand corner, we have the early grid computers that came out of the research community. Hundreds of machines, often in different locations, tied together very tightly through very high-speed connections. they were much more versatile than Napster because they could do all sorts of computing problems, from cosmology to environmental modeling to material science. And there have been some very important advances in that community, and Google has been taking advantage and working with many of the people in that community to push GRID forward. But what's really exciting is the next step, which I like to call the holy grid. This is the cloud. This is where everything's connected to everything, with common software, common interfaces that allow the smallest cell phone, the smallest sensor to plug into this grid that will include massive tera-op supercomputers. And that's where we're going, if we do it right, if we get people working together on the common standards, and if policymakers don't screw it up. Another way to think about technology is to think of the different steps. The first step, of course, is developing the hardware. And right now we're going through this burst of innovation, faster and faster chips, faster and faster networks. In a way, the hardware kind of leads. They create the new capability. We then have to create the software to use it. The hardest step is the next one, which is getting people accustomed to using the technology. And that's why I'm so glad Pew has done this study at this very early point in the development of the cloud to help us understand what some of the barriers are for getting people to take this technology and embrace it. Almost as difficult is the next step, which is getting organizations restructured so that people can take advantage of the technology. And then, of course, the rate-limiting step is policy. And it's not surprising that policy often lags behind technology by 5, 10, even 15 years. It takes a few dozen people in a development team to create a new technology. It takes more than 100 million Americans to come to some political consensus around a new problem. But we need to be working on these policy problems now, and we need the kind of data that Pew is developing both today and in the future. This data point is wonderful. It'll be 10 times more valuable when we get a second data point in 18 months or 2 years. I'm going to do something very risky here. Oh dear. I'm showing an equation and somehow it got reformatted.
It's very googly of you.
It's very googly, yes.
You.
Well, this is, as I said, it's very risky. I have a PhD from MIT, but I haven't used it for about 15 years. And anybody who knows equations knows that this is a nonsense equation, but it gets my point across. Policymakers need to understand that we need C, which is competition, combined with open standards and open source. Put those three things together, and we get the output on the right side, which is I, innovation, and C1, choice, C2, cheap. Those are the goals. We really do need to somehow get competition in the marketplace, because that will lead to the innovation we need to provide all sorts of new applications, all sorts of new infrastructure, all sorts of competing offerings that will drive down price and give us the cloud services we need. Let me just finish with my standard slide. This is one I've been using for 10 years. I've been here in Washington for 20, and these are the hot button issues in internet policy. I've been dealing with these issues for a long time. At the top of the list is privacy, and I'll let Ari talk primarily about that. But we have piracy, we have pornography and spam, we have security and protection, pricing, policing of illegal activities. A relatively new issue is psychology. What happens when our children immerse themselves in the cloud for 5 or 6 hours a day rather than watching television? Procurement issues, payment issues, and protectionism. These are all issues that are going to arise in the world of the cloud. The issues are now going to be 3 times more difficult, because we're going to have this transnational cloud, many different players involved. But equally important, resolving these issues is going to be 10 times more important. Because if we do this right, we are going to unleash a whole host of new applications. We're seeing some of them already. The grid is allowing the smallest company to have access to immense amounts of supercomputing power. The cloud will give us more reliability. We're going to create virtual worlds, and we're going to use the cloud to not only hook together computers and server farms, but also very small devices. $10 devices, $1 sensors. They'll be able to plug into the cloud and provide information to allow us to monitor our environment and develop new applications. All of that's going to be possible if we get the open standards and the faster, more reliable infrastructure we need to make it happen. I'm a technological optimist by nature. And after working in government for 10 years, I've become somewhat of a cyber libertarian. I know what government can and cannot do. I'm a cyber libertarian Democrat. As near as I can tell, there are 5 of us worldwide. Not even enough for a Facebook group. But as a cyber libertarian Democrat, I believe that government has a minimal role to play here, a very important role, but a minimal role to play. If they provide an environment for competition, we can unleash the creativity of companies that will create new ways of doing things and give users a whole range of ways to address the 10 Ps of cyber policy that I mentioned earlier. These tools can help us provide better protection for privacy, better protection for data, help prevent many of the concerns people have. But it's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a very exciting time to be working in this field. So thanks again, Alan, for a chance to be here, and I'll pass on the magic weapon.
The torch. Yes, thank you.
So I'd also like to thank Google for hosting this event. I mean, one of the great things about this panel, I think, is that everyone here is a technological optimist, as you said, which is sort of rare in a panel to have everyone be on that same general message. And I think we all think that the cloud and the move to the cloud is going to be a very positive step for computing for the future, and that we're on the way to doing it in the right way, and we have just a few tweaks to get there. I think the Pew study has really done excellent. The Pew and the team there have done excellent work in putting together this study that really goes into details about the first kind of glimpse at this, and I'm sure, knowing their history, that they're going to go into a lot deeper level as we move on in the discussion on the cloud. I think one thing that you really see, and John highlighted this in the slides, was in this section on page 7 about the possible data policies of cloud, the attitudes about possible data policies of cloud services. You see that consumers already have some expectations about what's going to happen to their information in the cloud. And I think that companies that have been in this space have recognized that and have made the first steps towards trying to address these the concerns that consumers have through the policies where they can. But really, the overarching view that you see from these 5 questions that were asked is that consumers expect that their information will be treated the same way in the cloud as it would be if that information were stored on their home computer. And that's a pretty tall order to ask, but that is what the expectation is. And in a competitive marketplace, we should be able to get to the point where consumers can have those kinds of control, that kind of control over their information in the cloud. And so you see that consumers don't want their information sold. They don't want when they put up files, when they put up photos, they don't want to see that information used without their consent. And even on the question of law enforcement, which I think was asked in a way probably leaning a little bit toward the law enforcement side, you still have 64% of people saying that they they have some concerns about how law enforcement might use their data in the cloud. And that's without even the educational piece here that says that if that same information were stored on your home computer, you have constitutional rights over it, the way that the courts have interpreted this. And when it moves into the cloud, you lose those constitutional rights. Again, the way that the courts have interpreted this today. We hope that will change over time, but that's the way that it's read today. I think if you had asked this same question, and I'm sure that Pew will move down the road and dig deeper in this in a way that sort of explains that to people, and then ask them the question, do you think that that's the right policy for today? Most consumers would be even more concerned. You'd have even more than 64% saying that they had concerns about that. So there are some areas, I think, especially in the privacy security space, where consumers do have these concerns. And I think that the companies that are working on this recognize that. And the question is, how do we address those concerns through their policies, through work with policymakers, moving down the road so that we can accelerate the trend toward cloud computing, get the benefits out of it, and still meet the consumer expectations.
Excellent. Well, thank you. We have a microphone set up over here if folks want to ask questions. I want to make sure we leave time for questions. I've got a couple myself to kick us off. Actually, first, an audience participation question. How many of us in the audience think we actually have a clear understanding of what we all mean when we're talking about cloud computing?
You mean us in this room?
Yes, you in this room.
Thank you.
I don't want to embarrass anybody. I didn't ask the reverse. Okay, well that's actually pretty good. But I was actually struck by John's comment that that people use it more than they understand it. And I was curious from the panel whether you agree. Do you think that people understand that they're using cloud computing, and And the second point is, does it matter? Any takers?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll respond. I mean, our customers are organizations and businesses and nonprofits and government agencies. And when those organizations sign on to Salesforce.com, they absolutely know they're using cloud computing, because they are suddenly taking a lot of data, which is often very sensitive and core to running their operation, and they're putting it in a Salesforce.com data center, processing it with our applications, and then accessing it over the internet. And so that is an enormous shift from their traditional client server, have the data center in the basement, whatever. And there are lots of questions about, is this reliable? Is it secure? Can I change this? What's the cost structure? Can other people see my data? Can I mash up with other web applications? So I think from an organizational level, as organizations move into the cloud, I think most of them really do know that this is a big shift. I think the users inside those organizations, no, they're just logging on to another app, and away they go.
Does it matter at all that the users may have no idea whether the mail's sitting on their computer or sitting out in the cloud?
I think it matters a lot, and I think there is a need for education here. You can say that at the first order, users understand enough. Most of the individual consumers do understand that their photos on Facebook are stored somewhere else. It's not on their own machine. But they don't understand what can happen to that information, and they often have not read any privacy policies. There's not an understanding about who has access to it and who can have access to it. And there's a definite need for education in that area.
I think users don't understand that they're using the cloud in the way they understand enough about their car to know when they need to get the oil change or get it in for service. So I do think there's a need for greater education to get people familiar with some of the nuances of the consequences of storing their personal data on the cloud. I think they know that they're doing that, but the second order understanding of the consequences, I think, is a different issue.
I was going to say, I don't think it should make a difference to consumers. I think we should be able to get to a point where it doesn't make a difference. But today there are obvious differences, and one of the things that we have to get to, and we're starting to see. I mean, Facebook, for example, as people were raising, they have great privacy controls, right? The defaults are set at a pretty low level, but if you want to go in and change who can see your information, it's very easy to do that. How do we do a better job educating consumers? First of all, building those controls across the cloud, right, and then giving the consumers the kind of education that they need to be able to adjust those controls, and maybe even meta controls. There's something here that we can do to get at this, to make it so that all of my information is treated the same no matter where it is in the cloud.
Since we're in Washington, let me ask a policy question, and some may have noticed we are in the midst of an election here. I guess a question for the panel, what one policy recommendation would you have for the next administration, or for the 111th Congress? What one recommendation would you have in terms of policies needed to either foster cloud computing or support it, or deal with the concerns that might be raised by it? Mike?
I'll take that on. I was fortunate enough to work in the Clinton White House for 4 years, and the most important thing we did in the first 4 years we were in the White House to promote the growth of the internet was not congressional legislation. It was actually to put the White House website up and tell the agencies they had permission to start using this strange thing called the internet and the World Wide Web. In the course of doing that, we had to fix some procurement regulations. There was some very important work we did on the Brooks Act that made it easier for companies to buy equipment and to move forward. But those two things together, I think, would be what I would focus on first, because it's the lowest hanging fruit. You know, if agencies get out there and start using the cloud themselves, let the world know how they're doing it, show how they've taken account of the security concerns and the confidentiality concerns, and then rewrite some of the procurement regs that today actually get in the way of full deployment of cloud, I think 101 things could happen very quickly. And that's the model we used back in 1993, 1994. And it was a huge impact. We spent $300,000 creating the White House website in 6 months, mostly college students working over the summer. And that single site forced every other agency in the government to get a site, because we told them we were going to connect to their site whether they were ready or not. And if they weren't ready, it was going to say...
It was a big checklist right up. They had an event, and there was a big checklist up, and the agencies were told, if you don't put up yours up, there'll be a blank space next to it.
We had a splash screen. Right? The splash screen said, the Department of blank is not ready for the web. And if we can do the same thing,
everyone had it up.
If there was a way to make sure that every agency was ready for the cloud, and if we showed how it can be done. That's why I'm very excited that the DC, here in DC, the DC city government has embraced Google Apps, and they're in many ways showing the way.
All right.
First of all, I agree with Mike that in terms of number one priority, that's number one policy recommendation. But close second, I would say, is this point that I was making about government data and the concern. To be really specific about it, it's the question about business records, and that if we treat this information like it's a business record out there, the same as bank account information and other information that is created by the company as opposed to information that's put up there, then by the individual, then it's going to have lower rights and lower access rights, and we need to do something about that from a policy perspective in terms of being able to address how that information is treated.
Humble goals, get the government to change the way it does computing, rewrite the Fourth Amendment, anything.
No, just apply the Fourth Amendment. Apply the Fourth Amendment.
Well, I give you a comment.
Bring the Fourth Amendment into the 21st century.
There you go, folks. You've heard.
Because actually most of the policy issues that we work on are international. And so my very simple policy priority for the next administration is to promote the free flow of secure information around the world. Because what happens with cloud computing, if it becomes balkanized, and all of a sudden if you're a Korean bank, which is true today, and you can't process any personally identifiable financial data outside of Korea, well, gee, that sort of freezes the cloud. And I think that there are lots of limits that exist like that today that are archaic. They're sort of in place. People didn't know about them. I think there are limits that people are getting paranoid. Oh my gosh, where's all this data? I don't want it to leave the country. And I think what we'll see happen is all of a sudden governments are going to say, hey, these are great trade barriers. This is a great non-tariff trade barrier. I'm just going to stop data leaving my country, and that is really going to prevent all these global platforms from coming in. So I think free flow of data around the world is key, and security is key, because with that comes accountability, and organizations have got to be held accountable for making sure that the data in their stewardship is secure. So that would be.
But wait, I would say, maybe people will see it as a trade barrier, but I also think that there's a point to sit where you say the U.S. Consumer data privacy laws are weaker than a lot of our neighbors, right? And this is part of the point that Canada makes in talking about why they've come up with local laws on treating data in the cloud. If we had stronger laws in the U.S., it would be much more difficult. Privacy laws in the U.S. would be much more difficult for them to make that point. If we had,
well, actually, the Canadian argument in British Columbia and Nova Scotia started off as a union issue that the unions wanted to keep jobs, so they forced the British Columbian Parliament to pass an act that said hospital data, healthcare data with personal information.
But again, it would be much more difficult for the data commissioner of the province of British Columbia to put out a paper saying that there is concern about U.S. companies holding this data if we had stronger privacy laws. It just would be the case.
Yes, but again,
it would help U.S. citizens as well, because we would have stronger privacy laws in the U.S.
But again, that's an interesting case, because the issue there, was government access to data. And what the Canadians were worried about was the U.S. government access to the data. So the
Correct.
privacy, yeah.
Correct. That's
So
what
the
I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you.
Right, you're not talking about e-commerce laws, you're talking about government surveillance laws.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, in
right.
Europe, it would be
Right.
mostly the commerce law piece, but I think also the government piece was the main part, the point that I was making. So.
I want to make sure we get a chance to turn to questions in the audience. We've got a mic back there. If folks would line up, that'd be great. And why don't we take our first question?
Yeah, so it's almost a cliche that people will, express much greater concern for data privacy on surveys than one would tend to infer from their actual behavior. So how do you gauge the extent to which the responses you get in the survey are actually sort of salient operative concerns, and to what extent it's, are you scared of meteors? Oh, yeah, meteors are pretty scary.
Good question, and it's not something we specifically went into in this survey. What you would do is try to hone in as specifically as you can on specific examples to try to really see the trade-offs. I will tell you that in other research that we do, we see a whole range of attitudes about e-commerce, for instance, that cut across income levels. So whereas maybe a lot of people in this room might be reasonably comfortable with some of the trade-offs of doing a transaction online versus possible risks, because the risks tend not to be so high, other kinds of online users assess that risk very differently. Low-income people are far more likely to express high levels of concern about sending personal information over the internet, and they are much less likely to engage in online transactions, and that's controlling for all the other conflating factors. So I would just encourage people to think about the range of user types in thinking about how people assess these trade-offs. Not just figure everybody is as technologically sophisticated as some of us might be.
I would actually compare it to the environment in that case, which is, people say that they care about the environment. They don't necessarily go out of their way to do environmental things, but if it's made easier for them to protect the environment and to take steps to do so, they will do it. And I think privacy is exactly the same way. They care about privacy. They will say that they care about privacy in a study. If you make it easy for them to do and you build it into the policy and we as a society care about it, then privacy will be part of the system and people will use it.
Another way to answer your question that doesn't involve surveys is just to look at all the anecdotes we've had over the last 2 or 3 years where companies like Facebook with its Beacon service have discovered what happens when you don't pay attention to consumers' privacy needs. And certainly the ability of users to express their views and to organize online has made companies a lot more sensitive to the need to protect privacy and to be perceived as a company that follows best practices in that area.
Next question. If you wouldn't mind identifying yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks for having us here today. My name is Peter O'Donnell. I work for Fannie Mae, a small chocolate company from Chicago. So I want to shift gears a little bit out of, it's a clever joke. I want to shift gears a little bit out of public policy. I think public policy is significant when talking about the cloud that your grandma's going to use to share photos. But the idea of cloud computing is much more than that, and I feel like we're approaching it as if we were talking about networking, but only talking about the internet, or as if we were talking about websites, but only talking about the World Wide Web, without talking about just the networking that enterprises want to do, or just the websites that corporations want to host. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the market and to a certain extent from technology policy, because I want my own cloud. You used the metaphor of an office building, and it's a good one if you're a small company. But if you're a major company, no way do you share office space. Major companies never share office space for lots of significant, identifiable, major business-driven reasons. Right. We want our own office buildings so we can control security. We want our own buildings so that we have all the plans, so we control the infrastructure, so we can reallocate them. So yeah, your software as a service is cute, but we already are very, very good at running data centers. My firm is, we're essentially almost like a .com. Now, don't draw any further inferences from that, But we're really good at running data centers, and all the major financials are. Right. We want our own cloud. The existing model of, whether it's thin client and it's a lump of crappy Java on the front end, and on the back end it's what? It's BEA, it's Oracle. But I want my own cloud. How is that going to evolve? Right. Where's that going to happen? You sell the Google search appliance because a lot of companies don't want to let your spiders come all the way into their network. Sell me a Google search appliance that does Gmail.
Any reactions here? I mean, what happens when, as the Rolling Stones say, somebody says, "Get off of my cloud"? What happens when people want their own cloud? How do we? Is it?
Well, I'll just give you what we've seen in the marketplace, and there is a lot of discussion about private clouds, that will happen. I can't really envision how it's going to happen, but you're also absolutely true. There's lots of data and lots of applications that organizations will never put into the cloud, ever. I mean, it is so sensitive that they want those servers, totally separate, and they want to run those. And so I think that there are limits to how much data is going to get shifted here. And I think your point about the high-rise office buildings is well taken. In our discussions about private clouds, what happens when you start moving into private clouds is you start losing a lot of the benefits of the public internet. Mashups, all of a sudden I can get Google Maps and mash it into Salesforce, and so there are prices that you pay for that, and I just think it's a question of both organizations and vendors working through those trade-offs together and figuring out architecture that works, and so that'll come.
John, Mike, well, try and keep it brief because we've got a healthy line, which is good.
Just an observation I had about what about people wanting their own cloud, and then I got to thinking about Pigpen from the Peanuts comic strip, but that's a different thing. But people are putting their social lives and personal lives online, and they're going to want the same measure of control over that kind of data that you were talking about at a corporate level. And I think it's important to understand that the social uses of these applications at the consumer level are really paramount at this point, and that makes the personal control of data issue, I would say, as important to an individual as it often could be for a corporation.
Just to add to that, I think you've come to the really critical question here for anybody who's trying to forecast how far the cloud will grow. Is this a niche application for 5 or 10% of all the world's computing, or is this going to be the dominant mode of computing? 80 or 90% of all the cycles and all the storage.
And I agree with the latter.
You do agree with the latter?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I think that is what I believe as well, but the CIA and intelligence communities and defense contractors, they're not going to want to plug into the worldwide cloud. But I do think, just as more and more companies have rented office space or let their employees work from home, people are going to want to be able to be part of the full richness of the cloud. It's going to be a cloud of clouds, just as it's a network of networks.
Right.
But I think people are going to be pushed because of cost concerns, because of new opportunities, because their clients and their collaborators are in the cloud. There's so many reasons to move that direction that I think it is going to be the vast majority of computing done this way.
I'd like to make sure we get a chance to get a few more folks to ask questions. Thank you for your question. I think we'll run maybe till about 10 after, since we started a few minutes late. And please go ahead.
My name's George Brett. I'm with Internet 2, and actually the question I have is more based on personal experience, and then also we're with higher ed, that the terms and conditions and intellectual property for the individual users, I think most people that I know are, how'd you say, somewhat numbed to shrink wrap licenses. You just sort of open and install the software from a CD. You sign up for Facebook, you check that little, I've read the T's and C's. Well, I know some people even make you go all the way to the bottom of the page just to pretend you've read it. Okay, so as part of this education, I think not many people really understand the terms and conditions fully of the different, you might say, vendors or services in the cloud. And what that comes then to the intellectual property. Who owns the data? And not to point any fingers, but I think Chrome had some interesting aspects to it when it first rolled out. As to anybody using Chrome in the first couple of days, Google owned everything that was chromed by the individual. So that would be a policy area that I think needs to be reconsidered and readdressed as we move into a Creative Commons sharing kind of environment.
Oh, and I would just note that the terms and conditions associated with Chrome have changed to modify that, and it's nice to know that we have a fan base that religiously reads those, and as they should, and we're glad to have made that change. But the broader question is a very good one about intellectual property in the cloud.
It's the second P on my list of Ps of cyber policy.
Right.
Intellectual property is key, and I don't think we've worked that out yet. There's still a lot of negotiation going on.
Well, again, just quick, in the business context with Salesforce, the data that our customers put in the cloud is their data. We don't look at it, we don't sell it, we don't market it, all we do is process it and serve it back to them. If they want to pull their data out and stop their relationship with Salesforce, they do that, and I think our licensing agreement says that we will hold that data for 6 months in case their files get corrupted or they want to come back in and restart the service or something, and then we flush it out of the system. So from the business model here, different than the consumer model, the data is the customers, and we just process it for them.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Justin Grimes. I'm a research associate for the Center for Information Policy and Government, and I have a question. You talk about a lot of the positive things of cloud computing, but what happens when it goes south? I think of Amazon's web services that's gone down multiple times, and what's the answer to that from a policy approach? Is it service level agreements to guarantee service, or how can we guarantee it from a policy level?
No, sorry.
You solved that problem.
Yeah, I'll be happy to respond to that, because our customers, Citibank and Merrill Lynch are running on Salesforce, and by God, that data center better be working. And our experience is, first of all, you have to aspire to extremely high levels of performance. And so I think we're doing about 150 million transactions a day, 99.9 something sort of uptime. And each of them goes through in about 300 milliseconds. And our experience is, so there is a reliability standard that is very high that you have to meet. But as importantly as that, what we have found with our customers is you have to be transparent. In the slide that I went through quickly at the end, we have something called a trust site. So if you go to https://salesforce.trust.com, you can go there every day and you can see the performance of our data centers. Whether you're a customer, whether you're a competitor, interested party, it doesn't matter. And so you see real time, what's up, what was the performance throughput, were there any issues, would all be noted, so that we try and make our performance, our reliability, as transparent as possible. And then we also have sites, what sort of security issues, phishing attacks are we seeing? How do you, if you want to go in and strengthen your security, here's how you do it. Because we found that customers, they really want two things. A, they want the performance, but they absolutely want that transparency, so that if there are issues, they're not just left in the dark and don't know what's going on.
And just to add on to that, it seems that more competition and more transparency, more truth in advertising is part of the equation. There's another piece of this which is a technological answer, and that is some of the new tools that allow you to take a piece of the cloud or the essential pieces of data that you're working with and keep them on your laptop or on your desktop. Things like Adobe Air and the Gears application. This is sort of the hybrid. Lotus Notes that IBM offered years ago was really differentiated by this feature. It allowed you to always be plugged into the cloud, but also carrying the data that you really want, so that when you're in an airplane or you can't get access, you have what you really need. And that's part of the answer too.
I actually want to ask a follow-up here about what this means for broadband policy, in the sense that Salesforce or A9 or Google can have the best uptime in the world. But if it doesn't matter to the average user if their broadband connection goes down every 5th day, or there's a power outage, or places where they don't have good internet connectivity. So how does this place even more of a fire under us to get better broadband out there?
That was part of my 3 times more important.
Yes.
And I think an element of that, on the topic of transparency, is better data collection at the federal level about where the infrastructure is, reliability. I don't think there's been a very good job done in the past couple of years we do data collection quite obviously at the Pew Internet Project, but to get good granular local data so that people understand better what's available in their community, I think that kind of transparency would be helpful in this regard as well.
One policy solution that would be an absolute nightmare would be if we had some kind of liability provision that let people go out and sue anybody who was associated with the cloud if their laptop crashed. I mean, this could be a really interesting few years as people sort out who are they going to sue if the cloud application that they depend on doesn't work for them.
Thanks for raising that, Mike.
I have a real quick follow-up question, then I'll leave. The question is, when you mentioned that going on with reliability is if you are injecting this into government services, a 99 reliability is great for consumers, and if it's down, they can't access Facebook or they can't access Flickr or something like that. But when it's a government service, that 1% of the chance, isn't there going to be some dangers with that?
Well, I'll just respond. It's that 1/100th% of a chance, not 1%. And if you look at the downtime in current government computing centers, it's more than that.
Yeah.
And so you are actually looking at a reliability standard that's much higher. Plus, you get into things like, hey, you never have to upgrade, you never have to patch, you never have to worry about security. All that is managed centrally. Everybody is always running on the latest platform. There is no legacy software. So all of that downtime where you're rebuilding sort of the old client-server stuff, all that's eliminated. So in fact, you have performance levels which are much, much higher than we have today.
Thank you.
Let's see if we can do a couple really quick.
Morning.
Go ahead.
Don Purcell, Catholic University School of Engineering. My question is on internet security. There are two articles published this year by the Washington Post, one in January, the other in August. The August report indicates a 69% increase in data breaches on the internet compared to 2007. The January report indicated the data breaches for 2007 were the highest on record. And my question is, given cloud computing and where we're going, in your judgment, is the internet security good enough to protect the data and information that's stored in the cloud?
Just to clarify, the article I saw wasn't about internet security. It was about data breaches of all type. It included
Internal.
computer files that fell off the back of a truck.
Yes.
It included
It
disgruntled
included
employees who downloaded.
It was other data breaches as well. You're right.
Right.
It was internet and all the above.
Right. So coming back to Dan's point, if we do the cloud right, we eliminate a lot of these problems. We actually reduce the chance that backup files are going to be lost in transit, or some disgruntled employee is going to get access to something he shouldn't have gotten access to. So this, I think, is one of the drivers that will help get us to the cloud. There's a wonderful book by Nicholas Carr. It's a very much a layman's guide to the cloud, and it's called The Big Switch. It's all about the shift to the cloud, and one of the drivers, in addition to cost and convenience and reliability, is security.
I think it could go either way, right? But the push is, how do we get the policies aligned so that we can, and this is both internal, corporate and in general public policy, aligned to push people toward the vision that the techno-optimist vision that Mike is espousing, that the cloud actually could be more secure. So we have to get to that point, and that means giving more controls and more access controls and getting things to the right levels where we can feel more secure about the security than we do in a world where we don't know where the data is, right?
I'd like to make sure we get to the last three questions. Maybe we just ask them very quickly and try and do short answers.
Sure, yeah. My name is Chris Termini. I'm a lawyer at Latham & Watkins here in the city. And my question relates to broadband capacity and broadband management, net neutrality. Cloud computing would invoke, my question is really fueled by ignorance, because on the one hand, I would think that maybe broadband capacity and our ability to download would increase with cloud computing as we go to the cloud. By contrast, if we're actually just having to retrieve certain documents and not downloading as much per se, so really it's a two-pronged question. As a business matter and as an infrastructure matter, do you think that cloud computing is going to require more broadband capacity, and as a policy matter, how would that best be handled?
Do
you want to stack up all three questions?
Yeah, why don't we ask all three, and then I'll let the panel answer them.
Hi, I'm Sawyer Jacobs. I work for the Arab Science and Technology Foundation, and I'm a cyber libertarian Democrat because I see endless humanitarian potential in the cloud, and mainly just because if you don't have to buy the Office suite or the Encarta CDs in Saudi Arabia, you're going to get a lot more work done. So I'm wondering how you guys, the team ahead of the curve, plans to liberalize the stodgy Chinese, the stodgy Saudi Arabian, the stodgy Iraqi governments, and get this technology in the hands of people who really, really need it.
Last question.
Hi, I'm Judith Helsing. My question is a little similar to that, but different than others. It relates to cloud computing and international development, and how do we get the education, the security, the network, more training so that developing countries who are building Web 2.0 services can use the cloud instead of having to go through expensive proprietary software, which then stalls them or doesn't enable them to advance as quickly as possible.
Okay, so turn to our panel. We got three questions, one about broadband demand, one about what do we do about the reticence of some governments to allow the deployment of some of these services, and the third about international development.
I'll take the last question first because it's one that I've worked on for quite a time. I was Vice President for Policy of the Internet Society in my spare time, and we've been working around the world to try to push the Internet into these countries. And the cloud is just an incredible enabler because it lowers the barrier to entry. You don't have to create your own server and install your own email system. You can actually just, once you get the connection and you got a web server going, you can start harnessing the power of these tools. The rate limiting step in many of these countries isn't the broadband, which is, it can be a problem, but it's not the worst. The worst problem is often the capacity of people to understand and use the systems. And with the cloud, we've dramatically lowered the skill level needed to get access to email, to data systems, to collaboration tools, whatever. So I'm very excited about this. We can have a much longer discussion and perhaps a separate Google talk about what government and industry and the nonprofit community can do to help facilitate the growth of the cloud overseas, but I'm very excited about it. Your question does relate to the other two questions, though, because if governments don't build an infrastructure that will support a wide variety of cloud services, and they try to let one or two companies control what's offered to their citizens, then we don't get the full power of the cloud. We don't have the cloud of clouds. We don't have the competition and the lower prices that cyber libertarians like myself hope to see.
John?
Yeah, my comment was just going to follow up on the latter part of Mike's comments about broadband demand. Obviously, the demand for it goes up, but use of the cloud, robust use of the cloud, means always connected, device-independent access to your data, and that gets into maybe another Google talk, which is spectrum policy as a way, which Mike was about to touch on, I think, as one of the policy issues that touches on the cloud.
I want to address the second question.
Sure.
I agree with you that there's a concern about who's going to have access to the cloud and the platforms that the cloud offers. But I do think that there's going to be a major driver in the future, and that it's going to be countries that don't do it are going to be at a major economic disadvantage. So governments are going to want to do it. Now the problem is that large countries, and I'm not going to single any out in particular, but I mean you can fill in the blanks, but who we're talking about will be able to change the policies for the cloud, right? And that will have an impact on the world because they're so big and the companies want to go in there. They're willing to make changes for their policies to bend to the needs of those dictatorships or those countries that have high demands on them, but offer a robust marketplace. So it's going to be up to the companies to stand up to those countries and say, we have to follow these rules across the world. That's the only way the cloud is going to work. This is how we set it up. If you want the benefit of the economic engine, you have to work with everyone in the same way that the whole rest of the world is working. And that's going to be a very difficult fight. I think it's something that we've been working on, our work on international human rights rules, working with companies and with Business for Social Responsibility and a lot of the human rights groups has been mentioned, but I think we'll be releasing some things soon. So we hope that will be a first step towards going down this path of making sure that as they see the economic benefits, that the companies can work together to ensure that we keep the strong policies ensuring freedom as well.
Dan, did you want to?
I'll make a final quick comment. And the last question is a great question. Actually, when Salesforce was founded, we put together a new philanthropy model called 111. So 1% of our capital base was put into a foundation. We give away 1% of our product free to 501c3s every year. And 1% of our employees' time, about a week a year, is set aside to do volunteer work. And actually, we share that model with Google. And we have, so if you're a charity, a 501c3, you get free Salesforce.com software, or actually software as a service. We don't sell software. Access to the cloud, whatever you want to call it. And I think there are about 3,500 foundations, nonprofits, charities, 501c3s running on Salesforce today. And just as far as how this influences governments and languages, I mean, you can change your language in these apps in 10 seconds. If you want to have Arabic, Spanish, French, Chinese, Japanese, it doesn't matter. It's all there, programmed. You hit a button and it changes immediately. And what is going to drive governments is consumers. I mean, everybody is using Google, and those people go into government and say, why can't I use Google in governments? You know, why can't I use Facebook in government? I'm used to dealing in this world. And so I really think there is a cultural tide that will change all organizations, including government. So.
Well, listen, this has been a great session. I want to make two quick observations. One is one of my takeaways is just sort of the general level of excitement, enthusiasm about this new model of computing. I should say a lot of us at Google have this sticker on our computers. I've got one right here. It says, it's a little bumper sticker. It says, my other computer is a data center. And I think, you know, the feeling among geeks at least, that you know, that there's this tremendous sense of possibility that comes from this shift to this new architecture and the power that's out there in the cloud for users. I think we're just beginning to see the applications that are going to be built and the services that are going to be offered, as well as the policy issues that are going to come, and there will be some, as we're hearing. The second observation I was just going to make is, you know, I actually started, I guess, like maybe 15 years ago or so in this field of internet policy, for lack of a better term. And I know that makes me actually a relative novice among this crowd here in the room. But you know, at the time, there was sort of a sense, at least among some, that, well, maybe there's this, you know, there's the internet. We're going to have to figure out how to adjust to the internet, and then there'll be a kind of new steady state in the public policy space that deals with the changes that have come from the development of the internet and the web in the mid-90s. And I think what's sort of interesting about all of this is that, in fact, the pace of change has not slowed. In fact, change has not stopped. That, in fact, we didn't just adjust and move on. That, in fact, that we're in many ways, I think, arguably still now just beginning to see the power of the network of networks and the general purpose computer and all of these advances. And the fact is that I guess that's good news for many of us working in the space, that there's going to be a lot more to talk about for a while to come. So this is really a great panel in the best spirit of what we're trying to achieve here. Come back on October 3rd and see Craig. I'm actually told that the Queen of England is coming and giving a talk at Google in London in October, so watch for that on YouTube. She has her own YouTube channel, by the way. And anyway, we're delighted to have you all here, and please join me in thanking our great panel.